been discussing, looking at primarily the imagery of leadership through the shepherd model that is so prevalent throughout the Scriptures. And Isaiah 56, starting in verse 9, is no different. What's going on here, in the first part of this chapter, he tells them that salvation is going to be made available to foreigners, like verse 6, and the foreigners who join themselves to the Lord to minister to him, to love the name of the Lord, and to be his servants. Everyone who keeps the Sabbath and does not profane it holds fast my covenant. These I will bring to my holy mountain and make them joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and their sacrifices will be accepted on my altar. And so he tells them that salvation is going to be open to foreigners, but they've got some issues. And he tracks those issues down, at least in part, to their leadership. And that's what the subject of verses 9 through 12 of chapter 56 is. And so he says, all you beasts of the field come to devour, all you beasts in the forest, his watchmen are blind. They are all without knowledge. They are all silent dogs. They cannot bark. Dreaming, lying down, loving to slumber. The dogs have a mighty appetite. They never have enough. But they are shepherds who have no understanding. They've all turned to their own way, each to his own gain, one and all. Come, they say, let me get wine, let us fill ourselves with strong drink, and tomorrow will be like this day, great beyond measure. So there's actually a couple of images that he uses throughout this section to talk about the leaders of Israel. He calls them watchmen in verse 10. He likens them to silent dogs that cannot bark, and then carries that imagery along. They like to lay down, they like to sleep, but they don't actually like to give notice to anyone of any danger. Verse 11, the dogs have a mighty appetite. They never have enough. And so they can't be satiated or satisfied. But they are shepherds who have no understanding. And so the imagery shifts there a little bit. These leaders who are blind watchmen, who are silent dogs, are shepherds without understanding. What's the implication of shepherds who have no understanding? What do shepherds need to understand? Okay, they need to understand how to be shepherds, how to lead. They need to understand where the true focus lies. Where's the true focus of shepherding lie? On the sheep. That's what it's all about. It's all about the sheep. But these people don't understand that. And notice what he goes on to say. After he says they're shepherds who have no understanding, he says they have all turned to their own way. So instead of doing things the right way, the way that God would have it done, they've turned to their own way. What's that language always mean in the Bible? It's used of Judas as well. He's gone to his own place, is the way it's used with him. There is a way which seems right to man, but its end is the way of destruction. This alternate way that emanates from within ourselves is never a good way. It's always a way apart from the way of righteousness that's been revealed by God. And so they've turned to their own way, each to his own gain. one and all. Each to his own gain. What does it mean, each to his own gain? Keep in mind the culmination of everything that we've studied, going all the way back to where this class started with the study of the law and the two great commandments that come from the law, upon which the entire law was built on. Okay. They're thinking about themselves. They're not thinking about God. They're not thinking about the sheep. They're not thinking about what's in the best interest of the sheep or what the sheep need. They're thinking about what they can get from the sheep. It's a mindset difference that I think is potentially useful to consider. We kind of have this type of across the board in our society, which is always, what is there for me to get from this? When opportunities come someone's way, the first question is, what's in it for me? How do I benefit from doing this thing? If that's the way you raise sheep, then you look at sheep as, okay, these are the producers of wool for me. These are the producers of possibly some milk that I can use to make cheese. These are the producers of meat. And it's all about how you can use the sheep. But that's not a way that a shepherd tends to a flock, is it? The way that a shepherd tends to a flock, at least if he tends to that flock the way that God has set forth for it to be done, is for him to lay down his life for the sheep. The great shepherd did that very thing, didn't he? He came down and actually died so that the sheep could live. And that's the extent to which this must be willing to go. But instead, he says, these are shepherds who have no understanding. They've turned to their own way, to their own gain. And when he says one and all, he just simply says what? All of them are like, you can look at any one of them, or you can look at them all as a group. This is what's going on here. Come, they say. Let me get wine, let us fill ourselves with strong drink, and tomorrow will be like this day, great beyond measure. Now there's two things that I think are being expressed in verse 12. One is their appetites can't be satisfied. Come, let me get wine, and let us fill ourselves. It's never enough. They're always wanting more. And then tomorrow will be like this day, great beyond measure. What is that? We talked about this a little bit last week. I mentioned the passage in James that warns us that our life is but a vapor that appears for a while and then vanishes away, and that instead of going through life arrogant, saying things like, I'm going to go to this place and engage in this business and make a profit, we ought to do what? We ought to say, if the Lord's will. If the Lord wills, we'll do this or that. The arrogance that people who find themselves, who have turned to their own way, who are doing what they want to do, who are only trying to satisfy themselves, and who, by the way, in trying to satisfy themselves, will never satisfy themselves. The eye is not filled with the seeing, nor the ear filled with hearing. The thing that's under consideration, are you ever satisfied? You ever met a wealthy man who said, you know what, I have enough money. I don't need to make any more. Or they all want just one more dollar. If I just had this, then I would be happy. But when that's attained, then what do we say? Well, but if I had that, I would be happy. And then that's attained, and we say what? The same thing, yet again. And that's what's being described here is people who have become self-consumed. That is not the kind of leadership that God looks for. In parents, for instance, what kind of leadership does God look for? Anybody? Okay, loving's good, like Jesus is good, but let's talk about in practical terms, what's the manifestation of loving parental behavior? Okay, nurturing and training. Why do we? Oh, okay, let's start this way. What's the difference between nurturing and training? What's the difference between those things? What is nurture? Yeah, they're very similar. So what's the nuance that separates the things? I would suggest to you that nurturing tends to be reflective of my efforts to create an environment where growth and learning can take place. If I have a nurturing home, then I have a home that's safe, that the members of the household want to be in rather than wanting to be somewhere else because they feel comfortable and safe there. If I have a nurturing home, then there's plenty of nourishment, right? They have all that they need for health and well-being and satisfaction and satiation. If you have a nurturing home, then you have the opportunity to learn and to grow. Is there a way in which a parent or a boss can stifle growth? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay. Training is teaching how. Absolutely. I agree completely. I think that language is about as good as you. It's the process. It's not just sharing the information, but it's providing for the opportunity for them to experience it and to learn how to do it. There is a difference between having theoretical knowledge of something and being trained how to do it, isn't there? If anybody's ever run a business, they understand the difference because when they hire somebody straight out of college, they've got somebody who's been trained in the theory of how to do things. But then what do they spend the first 6 months, 9 months, year of this person's employment in their company doing? Training them how to actually do it. Yes? Okay.
More guidelines and more of a boundary than nurturing is. Because the nurturing is like you're talking about the environment and a place of, put it like this. You can take clay while it's soft. You're nurturing the clay. But once you get the mold and you put it in the oven, it's baked, it's hard. That's the training. That's the result because the two are different from The other one is, now, here you go. You can tell a 3-year-old, this is your bike. But I ain't got confidence. Oh, you can do it. You come up with it. And a child, you're nurturing him. He gets on that bike, you're training wheels on the bike, you're training him. It's the pushing forward.
Okay.
And accomplishing something. I done used about 8 different analogies.
Let's use a doctor as an analogy. How many of you want a doctor operating on you that's done nothing more than read about the procedure out of a textbook? Or how many would you prefer to have gone through proper training to learn how to use and operate the equipment and to make the decisions that have to be made? By the way, there's a lot that goes into training a doctor how to do an operation. And teaching hospitals nurture young doctors, or they should. They don't all do it, but they should. They should create an environment where a young person learning to do that work has the opportunity to train and to grow and to develop without hindrance. Yes. We'll add to it that driving laws in Louisiana are different than driving laws in New York, and driving in this town is different than driving just about anywhere in the world. So unless they know and understand that you can't make a left-hand turn, they may not ever get where they're going. And so there is a certain amount of training that has to go in to the process. And the nurture is the care and the love and the provision of the things, and the training is the opportunity for growth and development and the opportunity to try and maybe even fail. And where this comes to a focus in the home for me is this passage where we're told, fathers, raise up your children in the fear and admonition of the Lord, but not to do what? Not to provoke them to wrath. In other words, you need to train them, but you need to train them in a nurturing environment where they can grow and learn and do these things. Don't be overly harsh.
That's where the third part comes in from the nurturing and training and the admonition.
Okay?
Without that, you're not going to correct.
You're right. But there's a way in which we can admonish without breaking someone's spirit. And a good leader following the plan of God, which says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, puts themselves in that position and says, how would I want to be told this if I was in their shoes? How would I want to be treated if I was in their shoes? That's the way I need to do this, in a way that helps them rather than becomes a stumbling block for them. That's true in the home. It's true in the workplace. It's true in the Lord's church. Local congregations need to create those kind of environments where people can grow and people can learn, people feel safe, where someone is looking out for their best interest. In fact, where everyone is looking out for their best interest. We're told, point blank, every one of us, not to look out for our own interest alone, but also to do what? To consider those that are around us. And so, when we become selfish, and it's all about me, and it's all about satisfying me, and it's all about filling myself, and it's all about what I'm going to get out of this, tomorrow's going to be like today. It's going to be great beyond measure. I'm just going to have my way. He's saying that is irresponsible leadership. That's not healthy. That's not shepherd kind of leadership. Shepherd kind of leadership leaves the comfort of their home and goes out and lives in the field with the sheep. There was a book that was written a number of years ago about the role of elders And the title of the book was They Smell Like Sheep. Why would they smell like sheep? Because they're down there with them. Living with them, holding them, carrying them when they need to be carried, binding them up when they need to be bound, feeding them, sleeping with them, making themselves one of them. That's the kind of leadership that it takes. And what's being talked about here in Isaiah is that they lacked that kind of leadership, and that led to the destruction of the nation. Well, if it led to the destruction of Israel, and there's supposed to be that kind of care and concern and attitude in local churches where it's missing, what happens to local churches? They suffer the consequences. If it's missing in homes, what happens? We have to think about these things. It's not just about satisfying me and me getting what I want. Though as parents, sometimes that's the way we go about our business, isn't it? This is what I want. Sometimes good parents actually sacrifice what they want to supply the needs of the household. Anybody ever see the movie Mr. Holland's Opus? That's really what that whole movie was about. This man never did quite do what he wanted to do because he was always being responsible. Then there's a subplot. He did a terrible job in his association with his child for a while because they had communication issues and it was hard. And he absorbed himself in his work rather than in his family. There's a whole other subplot. And that's the truth about any of these things. When we're dealing with people, we're complicated. Relationships are complicated. And so though we might be doing one thing really, really well, we might be doing another thing very, very poorly. And what the Word of God is challenging us to do is to engage in this from the standpoint of love is the overriding principle. I love God and I love my neighbor as myself. And therefore, I'm going to do to others what I would need if I was in their position. Because I'm concerned about them. I love them. I care for them. There's a place in the New Testament that says that love covers a multitude of sins. How does love cover a multitude of sins? Well, it doesn't overlook them. It's not external like that. It's not that my love causes me to not notice the wrong that's done by people that I care about. Love covers a multitude of sins because when I love, I don't commit the sins. When I love the people around me, my concern is for them over myself. When I love God, what do? Jesus said, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. If I love God, I don't sin. And so any sin from that respect, actually the core of it is a lack of love for God. Or if we want to look at it differently, selfishness. Selfishness is at the root of every sin. Adam and Eve in the garden. Why did they do what they did? Because they were looking to their own desires. They knew what God wanted done, but they loved themselves more than they loved God. Turn to Jeremiah chapter 10. We'll look at another prophet of God. We'll look at a series of verses from Jeremiah. verses 17 through 21 in chapter 10. Gather up your bundle from the ground, O you who dwell under siege. For thus says the Lord, Behold, I am slinging out the inhabitants of the land at this time, and I will bring distress on them that they may feel it. Woe is me because of my hurt. My wound is grievous, but I said, Truly this is an affliction, and I must bear it. My tent is destroyed, and all my cords are broken. My children have gone from me, and they are not there. Is no one to spread my tent again and to set up my curtains? For the shepherds are stupid, and do not inquire of the Lord. Therefore they have not prospered, and all their flock is scattered. And so he's describing the terrible condition. They're living under siege. God says, I'm slinging out the inhabitants of the land at this time. I'll bring distress on them that they may feel it. My tent's destroyed, verse 20. All my cords are broken. My children have gone from me, and they're not. The house is falling down, and the people are scattering from the home. Why is all this happening? Verse 21. For the shepherds are stupid and do not inquire of the Lord. In other words, they're not concerned with what God thinks about how things ought to be done. So they don't seek what God's counsel is. They shepherd after their own desires. Therefore they have not prospered, and all their flock is scattered. That's what happens. And it happens anywhere that you put this into practice. Again, we'll remove this and put it into the business world for a moment. If you have two businesses that are both doing the same task, and you see one that is successful and all of their employees have been there for their entire careers, they've never worked for anyone else but this one company, and over here you see constant turnover and people coming and going and never the same people. What do you know about those two workplaces? Which one takes care of their people? The one where people stay. That's the sign of people who are being cared for. Now, even in places where they don't care for their employees, occasionally you'll have an employee or two who stick it out and who stay. I'm talking about wholesale, widespread behavior over the life of a company. People remain in their jobs because of the quality of their bosses, not because of the job. And the same is true in the home, and the same is true in the Lord's church. Same is true in the nation. Why do we have 10,000 folks from an island in the Caribbean standing on our southern border asking to come into our country? Why aren't they staying in their country? Because the shepherds are stupid. And they're blind and they're satisfying themselves. And so the sheep are scattered. They're trying to find greener pastures. Yes, ma'am. Well, I heard one guy interviewed, and they just asked him, are you going back home? Absolutely not. That's not even an option. That's what they're trying to get away from. Chapter 23, verses 1 through 6. Same book, Jeremiah. Woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture. Now we're going to change gears just a little bit. We talked in chapter 10 about the outcome of shepherds who don't follow the Lord. Now we're going to talk about the outcome for the shepherds. Woe to shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, declares the Lord. Therefore thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, concerning the shepherds who care for my people. You've scattered my flock and have driven them away. You have not attended to them. Do you see the contrast there? Attending to the sheep is very different than driving them away. Attending falls in the category of nurturing. Driving them away does not. I will bring them back to the fold. Oh, I skipped something, didn't I? Behold, I will attend to you for your evil deeds, declares the Lord. I will gather the remnant of my flock out of the countries where I have driven them. I will bring them back to their fold, and they shall be fruitful and multiply. I will set shepherds over them who will care for them, and shall fear no more. They shall fear no more, nor be dismayed. Neither shall any be missing, declares the Lord. Now, there's a series of things that are present where nurturing and training takes place. People care for them. That's nurturing. They shall fear no more. That's that nurturing, safe environment. Nor be dismayed. What's dismayed mean? Anybody have any ideas about what that word means? Don't have to be dead-on dictionary accurate. Just verse 4. I'll set shepherds over them who will care for them. They shall fear no more. That is, the sheep shall fear no more, nor be dismayed. Okay. Discouraged. Disheartened. Hopeless. Dismayed means that someone is so flustered by the circumstances that they have no idea what to do. Dismayed is the opposite of trained. When people are trained, they know how to respond. They know what to do. They know the process, and they're not dismayed by it. Neither shall any be missing. I'm going to put shepherds in there that's going to bring them, and they're not going to be missing. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as a king and deal wisely, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land. In his days Judah will be saved, and Israel will dwell securely, and this is the name by which he will be called. The Lord is our righteousness. Anybody want to hazard a guess what Jeremiah is talking about? Who is this branch? Yeah, it's talking about Jesus. It's talking about the Christ coming. And the shepherds of Israel had behaved in such a way that the people were scattered all over the world. You remember Acts chapter 2? Devout Jews from all over the world came to Jerusalem. Why were there devout Jews all over the world? Because the shepherds of Israel had brought destruction upon the house. And they had been scattered. And he said, I'm going to gather that remnant of my flock out of the countries where I have driven them. I'll bring them back to their fold. They shall be fruitful and multiply, because I'm going to set shepherds over them who care for them, so that they don't fear anymore or be dismayed or be missing. I'm going to raise up For David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king and deal wisely. It's talking about what he was going to do in the days of Christ and the establishment of the church. And understand that in that age, he is going to set shepherds over them who will care for them. What happens if the shepherds don't care for the sheep? Go back to verse 1. Woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter. Look in chapter 50 of Jeremiah's letter, or prophecy. Just verses 6 and 7. My people have been lost sheep. Their shepherds have led them astray, turning them away on the mountains. From mountain to hill they have gone. They have forgotten their fold. All who found them have devoured them, and their enemies have said, we are not guilty, for they have sinned against the Lord, their habitation of righteousness, the Lord, the hope of their fathers. There's a lot here in these two verses. But he describes the people of God being like lost sheep. Why? Because their shepherds have led them astray. What are shepherds supposed to do? Lead them safely together to pasture. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. But instead, they led them astray, turning them away on the mountains. Instead of bringing them to the fields and the valleys, they turned them away on the mountains. From mountain to hill they've gone. They've forgotten their fold. They're not looking after the sheep. They're not, what is the fold, by the way? It's the temporary pen that they would erect for the sheep to sit safely in at night. But these shepherds, they've forgotten about actually taking care of the sheep and actually leading the sheep where they need to go. And the result for the sheep, all who found them have devoured them. Their enemies have said, we're not guilty, for they've sinned against the Lord. People ever feel justified doing wrong to someone because, well, they brought this on themselves? Sometimes we do that with other people's crimes too. I don't care what anybody does or says. That's not license for someone else to mistreat them. Yes, sometimes people do walk disorderly. But that never legitimizes someone else's mistreatment of them. And yet that's the way people look at it. Well, you know what? If you're just going to wander out here by yourself. By the way, who is our enemy? Who's the one that's prowling around like a lion seeking to devour us? And do you think he's going to apologize for taking us? Or do you think he's going to say, you know what, that poor guy, he's lost. And his shepherds haven't taken good care of him and haven't provided him the food and shelter that he needs. And so I'm going to have mercy on him and not attack him, and maybe he'll find his way to a good shepherd. Is that how Satan's going to deal with us? No. He's going to devour us. My people have been lost sheep. Their shepherds have led them astray. We have to be mindful of such things and avoid such things. It's very serious. I've got about 90 seconds left. Flip over to the book of Jude, please. Way, way over here to the book of Jude. Verses 12 and 13. Just to set the stage, there is a big discussion in the middle of this about false teachers, about the effect that they have. Verse 12, these are hidden reefs at your love feast as they feast with you without fear. Listen to this next phrase, shepherds feeding themselves. Waterless clouds. What do clouds exist for? To bring the rain. If they don't bring rain, what good is it? Swept along by the winds, fruitless trees in late autumn. You're supposed to have apples on the tree in late autumn. If the apple tree doesn't have apples, what good's the tree? Twice dead, uprooted. He calls them what? Shepherds feeding themselves. Who are shepherds supposed to be feeding? The sheep. And so all throughout the Scriptures we get this imagery that shows us that when we find ourselves in, when we fail to use those opportunities to the interest and satisfaction of the people who are being led, then we are shepherds who are feeding ourselves. We're trying to satisfy our own appetites. We're people who are drunk on the title. We think we're better because we're a manager. Yes.
Right quick. Outside of the self-indulgence, it's what they place their value on. Quick example, I watched a TV show the other day. People were living on a mountain, just took all summer building their new farm and their house. The mountain caught on fire. They evacuated, but they left the animals. These girls got in the truck, took the producers of the show, ran up the mountain, risked their lives because they valued those animals that they needed and they were to oversee and rescue those animals because the value that they seen in the animals was more important than anything else they had. And I think that's a great analogy because shepherds that don't lead don't put the value on what it is they're supposed to be shepherding.
Exactly. And good shepherds lay down their life for the sheep. They don't walk on the sheep's back to get safely across the swollen creek. Anybody have any questions or comments? We're out of time. There's not a big slew of people coming in right now, so. All right. Thanks for the